Chapter 3. The Therrien. Year 670. The bells tolled again in Trois-Rivières, this time for a widow's new beginning. Judith stood at the altar on a cold January morning in 1667. Her children gathered behind her, their eyes wide with both curiosity and uncertainty. Her hand rested in that of Jean Therrien, known as Dit Duhem, a settler who promised her security and partnership. Jean was neither wealthy nor idle. He was a man of the soil, of the river, of New France itself. His hands were scarred from labor, his voice steady, and though he was not her first love, Judith saw in him the chance to steady the ship of her life. She was 33, no longer the young bride who had once defied her mistress to wed a tailor. Her face bore lines of grief, her hands bore calluses, yet her will remained unbroken. For the sake of her children, she said the vows once more. The parish records note the marriage simply, January 26, 1667. No embellishments, no romance recorded, but for Judith, it was the promise of shelter from the storm of widowhood. The years that followed were brief, but not without joy. In March 1669, Judith gave birth to a son, Jean-Baptiste Therrien. She held him in her arms with a mother's weary tenderness, praying that this child would be spared the fate of those she had buried before. Her older children, now accustomed to the rhythm of loss and new beginnings, gathered around their half-brother with curiosity. Jean Therrien worked the land, shouldered debts, and provided what he could. For a time, Judith allowed herself to hope that stability might at last be hers. She had known too much upheaval, too many graves dug before their time. With Jean, she thought, perhaps God would grant her rest, but fate had other designs. By 1670, Jean Therrien was gone, dead at Nicolet, leaving Judith widowed for a second time. She was left again with her children, her debts, her fragile standing in a colony that demanded women be tethered to men for survival. The parish registers do not dwell on grief. They record names, dates, bare facts. But one can imagine Judith kneeling in the dim light of a church, her rosary slipping through her fingers, her whispered prayers mingling with the cries of her infant son. Once again, she faced the world alone. Yet if life had taught her anything, it was this. Judith Rigaud did not remain downcast for long. She had crossed an ocean. She had faced down courts, creditors, and the cold judgment of her neighbors. Widowhood, even twice over, would not silence her. When she lifted her head from prayer, there was no self-pity in her eyes, only resolve. She would endure.